Thank you, and thank you for being here this evening to learn about this really important topic. I'm going to jump right in because they want us to try and keep it to 30 minutes, and then we'll take some questions at the end. So, what exactly is human trafficking? There are two types. The first type is sex trafficking. So this is a commercial sex act that's induced by force, fraud, or coercion if it's an adult, but those are not required if it's a juvenile, in which the person induced to perform that act has not yet reached the age of 18. There can be human trafficking or sex trafficking if we're talking about adults, but what I work on mainly is juvenile trafficking because I supervise our juvenile court in Delaware County. And so when I address this around the state and do trainings, that's what I'm talking about, are juveniles. Labor trafficking is the second type, which is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, obtaining a person for labor or services. Again, force, fraud, or coercion if we're talking about adults, not if we're talking about juveniles. So they're forced into paying off some kind of debt, usually for an adult, sometimes a parent, a relative, what have you. We are not necessarily talking about all instances of prostitution. There is still prostitution that exists, but we're talking about people, juveniles who are being forced into the commercial sex trade. We are not necessarily talking about smuggling into the country, not that that doesn't occur, but what we're talking about are, generally speaking, Indiana kids found in Indiana being forced into human trafficking. There are times when we recover children who are from other states, but it doesn't have to involve transportation, although sometimes it does. Indiana Code 3542 3.5 is the human trafficking code for Indiana. You'll see on the left side of the screen, again, the language of force, threat of force, or fraud, but that's where we're talking about an adult, and that would be then a level 4 felony. On the right side of the screen, though, you'll see that prosecutors do not have to prove that force if we're talking about someone who's a juvenile, and it's raised then to a level 3 felony. And any individual can be guilty of committing trafficking of a child. There's no special relationship that's required, although a lot of times in cases we do see familial trafficking. So we'll see parents trafficking their children, aunts and uncles trafficking nieces and nephews, typically for rent, for, where they live, or for drugs. Restitution is available to trafficking victims, and they may also have a civil cause of action against their trafficker. It's tied as the second largest and fastest growing criminal industry in the world, just behind the drug trade. And as Stephanie told you in the introduction, that's because children are a reusable commodity. If you think about the drug industry, someone has to spend their own money to either buy the materials to make drugs or to go out and purchase the drugs, go out and sell them, take that money, reinvest, and so forth. When they have a stable of children that they're selling and reselling and reselling, they're not putting any money into that, they're not buying children, they are sucking them into the industry in different ways. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but they just continue to make money, 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 money. Many of these children will tell you that they're sold 10 times a night, 6 days a week. And so the trafficker is able to take all of that money as profit. There's $150 billion a year generated by the human trafficking industry, and I would tell you that those numbers are a little bit old, and that might be a larger number today. So 1.6 million children run away in the United States each year. 1 in 3 of those children will be sucked into the human trafficking industry within 48 hours of running away. And when I say run away, I mean run away. They're not just gone for a couple hours because they were mad at mom and dad. We're talking about gone for 24 hours. And so you're thinking here about, 300,000 children a year who are sucked into the human trafficking industry. But I'll tell you that we think that that number is on the low side. And that's because those numbers come from the number of children who were charged with prostitution every year. Many states, now like Indiana, have become safe harbor states. And so when we're only talking about children who are brought into either the delinquency side of the system or the DCS side of the system, through prostitution charges, I can tell you as a judge, we see kids come into the system for all a variety of reasons when we discern that they are victims of trafficking. So that 300,000 number is on the low side. 80% of these children have been involved with the Department of Child Services at some point. A lot of times at the time that we discover that they are victims of human trafficking, they are involved with DCS, 50% of them have been in the foster care system at some point. The average age of entry for children into the human trafficking industry is 12 to 14, and that's for girls. Generally speaking, we find that for boys it's a little bit younger, usually 11 to 13. And as I told you, that 300,000 number is based on that number of children who run away and then are charged with prostitution. So when we say 100 to 300,000 children are involved in the industry each year or sucked into it, that's why I'm telling you I think it's a low number, because we see kids come in on the DCS side, so not even charged with a delinquency, or we see them on the delinquency side charged with battery, auto theft, or even status offenses like runaway. So there are a variety of different reasons they come in, and that's why I'm telling you I think that number is low. 83% of these kids have been determined to be U.S. citizens, and that's how we know that this is a U.S. problem affecting U.S. children, not foreign children being brought into the country. So where does it happen? This is a map from the website called Polaris. Polaris is a group that works with human trafficking victims and working on the issues of human trafficking. And so this map shows the number of calls and where those calls were made in the U.S. And I think this map is from 2014. And now what I want you to look at is the next map of the U.S. highways, and then back to where the calls are. So we know that a lot of these kids are transported. We know in Indiana that we are on two different routes. We are on a route from Florida to Chicago, and then of course we have I-70 running through the middle of the state. And so we know a lot of kids are transported through Indiana, and so that's why I say a lot of times we do recover children who are from other states, but we also have Indiana children who are being taken to other locations, and then we also have Indiana children who are being trafficked in their own backyard. And so it's happening in your community, it's happening in mine. So here's the big challenge. Many of these children will not self-identify. When I was first elected judge and I knew that Delaware County had already seen one trafficking case that we had identified, I knew that we would see more. And so when I went first to my national JDAI, that's the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative conference, I went to a breakout session called Detention Reform for Girls. I'm a girl, that sounds interesting. Let's go see what they have to say. And so what we really ended up talking about most in that session was trafficking. And so I started asking questions because I was brand new to this. I had no idea what I was getting into, and I had no idea what to do at home. How do I help these kids? And as a judge, my first thought was, the first time that some child comes in and tells me, which we know is not going to happen, that they're a victim of trafficking, and we say, okay, well, we're going to get you in services and we're going to get you out of that, rescue you, which is not language we should be using. I thought they would tell me that and they would thank me. I couldn't be further from the truth. These kids do not see themselves as victims. If it happens and the child immediately is able to get a hold of someone, family, law enforcement, and get someone involved, and we get them fast, then yes, then that's a different story. But typically what happens is these are kids who are in the foster care system, or who are part of DCS, or they don't think their parents love them, or their parents don't care about them. How many teenagers do you know who fit that bill? And so when they're recruited, when they are spotted, because these traffickers use spotters, and so when they're sucked into it, they're sold this dream life. You're going to make money, we're going to make all kinds of money, and they see themselves then as being independent, and they see themselves as being able to make money, and so they don't see themselves as victims. And so by the time we are able to identify them and recover them, they've typically been in the system in the life, in human trafficking, for at least a couple of years, sometimes longer. And so by that time, they're not going to cooperate. They don't cooperate with law enforcement. They will not tell their story. They will not, tell us in court what's going on. And so for us to even try to identify them, to recover them, is a huge challenge. So we have to find different ways that we can identify them, to look for red flags, to train. And this is why I come to groups like this, so that you all kind of know, if you see something that doesn't look right, you know what to do. Trust your gut. That's my first thing, is trust your gut. We do have federal laws that address the issue. One of them is the Preventing Sex Trafficking and Strengthening Families Act of 2014. Many of these children were just marked as AWOL. You know, they were in the foster care system, they would run. Running is one of the biggest red flags that we have. And so if they ran and people just got tired of looking, they were just marked as AWOL. We didn't have Amber Alerts. States are now required to report missing children to law enforcement and to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which is what the NCMEC is. So some risk factors for youth include a history of childhood abuse, family conflict with violence, prior involvement in the child welfare system, poverty and homelessness, but I don't want you to get a misconception that it's only those kids. I mean, we see kids all across the gamut. You know, this is not a respecter of any socioeconomic status. A need to be loved. I mean, that's every child that you know. They feel misunderstood, their parents don't care. They want independence and they'll test the boundaries and take the risks. They're attracted to consumer goods. If you see a child who is from a family where they can't afford designer clothes or for their hair to be done at a beauty salon or their nails to be done, and they're showing up in designer clothes and their nails are done and their hair is done, that's another huge red flag. How many of you remember Maslow's hierarchy from school? So this is what pimps use to lure and keep children in human trafficking. They zone in on whichever one of these needs fits that child the most. And I'm telling you, they write books and articles to teach other people how to become pimps, and they use Maslow's hierarchy. There are books for sale on Amazon that you can buy, learn how to be a pimp. There are articles that are written, learn how to be a pimp. This is what they use. This is a sample of Backpage.com. How many of you have heard of Backpage? Few. How many know about Craigslist? Okay. Remember on Craigslist when they had escort services and then they took them down, they were pressured into taking those escort services off their website? So what happens to those ads? They go someplace else, and most of them, a lot of them are on Backpage. So this is just a sample screenshot of what it looks like. When I go and talk to my groups in my hometown in Muncie, you know, people look at me like I have two heads sometimes. You know, Judge, this isn't a problem in Muncie, Indiana. And I say, yes, it is, and here's how I know it is. Because Muncie has so much business, we have our own page on Backpage.com. Yeah, and you know, Muncie's not the only town that has that. I mean, Indianapolis obviously does, South Bend does, Lafayette does. And there are a lot of towns in Indiana who have their own page. And you don't get your own page unless there's enough business to justify that page. So a lot of them are on Backpage. I mean, that's where, like, my probation officers, if they have a child who's run away, I've authorized them, they can go to Backpage and look for that child. These ads used to be free, or they are free now. I've got them switched, but they were in a different location on Backpage, and now there's some lawsuits in California. They've, I think, criminally charged the people who own and operate Backpage. We're waiting on to see what happens with those suits and the charges, but right now you can still find those ads on Backpage. Here are some of the health indicators. Signs of physical abuse like bruises, black eyes, burns, cuts, broken teeth, multiple scars. Malnourishment, evidence of trauma, poor dental hygiene, frequent or multiple STDs or pregnancies. Branding is one of the biggest. Again, another one of our big red flags. If you see a child with either a male name or the word daddy tattooed on their neck, call DCS. That's your first call, and then to law enforcement. That's a huge red flag that that child is being trafficked. But now we also know we have tracking chips. These have not yet, to my knowledge, been seen in Indiana. We found this information through some folks that were presenting out of Atlanta, and so we got this information from Riley Hospital. The tracking chips are like those used in animals, and this is just one example. Typically you're going to see it in the web of the hand between the thumb and the forefinger, sometimes on the underneath part of the arm, sometimes on the top of the hand, sometimes in the neck under the ear. So if you see that kind of a bump on a child, again, call DCS and call law enforcement. Indiana has made some progress in legislation. The first thing that we had to deal with was our CHIN statute. You know, on the DCS side, we have CHINs, or Child in Need of Service, a petition that gets filed when there's an accusation that a parent or guardian was abusive or neglectful to their child or children. Well, so the problem with the statute was that it only referenced parents or guardians, and we know a lot of times we have third parties who are trafficking children. Sometimes it's the parent or guardian, but sometimes not. So we worked with DCS and we got the CHIN statute modified, so now human trafficking is its own separate paragraph in the CHIN statute. Under Indiana Code 3542 3.51, that's what we talked about earlier as the Indiana trafficking statute, purchasers only face 1 to 6 years in Indiana. And in my opinion, this is what we really need to try to focus on, because purchasing is what drives this. If we didn't have so many people purchasing sex with juveniles, we wouldn't have such a huge human trafficking problem. As an example, in Delaware County, Restored, which I'm going to tell you about in just a second, is an agency, and they work with our law enforcement to run operations. Well, they decided they were going to reverse operation, and that is placing a fake ad on Backpage and trying to go after the purchasers. So they placed a fake ad, no photograph. They did the wording such that it was fairly obvious that it was a juvenile that was being sold. And within 12 hours, they had 98 offers to purchase that child. So that told us immediately that there's a huge problem. And so we're working with law enforcement to try to get them to continue then to run those kind of operations in addition to operations that try to actually recover the children. The statute in Indiana does not currently delineate between purchasing a juvenile versus purchasing an adult. So I'm working with legislators this year to try and change that. And then Indiana Code 354542 was our prostitution statute. Adults can now be charged with prostitution, but not juveniles. So Indiana became what's called a safe harbor state effective July 1 of this year. Yeah, thank you. There's some controversy around it, but you know, to be honest, it just doesn't make sense to me that you could charge a juvenile with prostitution. You know, if they're not old enough to consent to a sexual relationship below the age of 16, 16 and above, depending on the relationship, then why are we charging them with prostitution? It just didn't make any sense. So I'm thankful that the legislature also saw it that way. And Indiana Code 3137-2211 is a new statute that went into effect also July 1 of this year, where a movement may petition the court to vacate a conviction or an adjudication if they were a juvenile, if they were a victim of trafficking at the time that whatever the offense was occurred. So they have to go back in and show that they were a victim of trafficking whenever they were convicted of whatever it is that they were convicted of, and they can ask the court to actually vacate it. It's not an expungement, it's vacating it. So I mentioned Restored a minute ago. Restored is an agency here in Indianapolis. It's run by a woman named Tracy McDaniel. She is very sorry that she could not be here tonight. She's actually attending the Juvenile Sex Trafficking Conference put on by Shared Hope International in New Orleans this week. And so that's why you got me. So Restored, when Tracy started by working at the Julian Center, and she first encountered victims of trafficking there and decided that that was her calling, and that's really what she wanted to do. And I'll tell you that this woman is a saint. She has the patience of Job. I could never do her job. She has been kicked, spit at, chairs thrown at her, you know, by these kids who don't see themselves as victims. But, you know, she's there from the get-go through the end. So she works with law enforcement on the operations. She will get those kids into services. She'll come to court and testify for them. She'll make recommendations to the court about services. She meets with them. So kids like who are placed at the Youth Opportunity Center in Delaware County, she meets with them once a week. So they have like a group session. And then she works with them through the time that they're either emancipated or, you know, placed back at home or whatever happens to them. She has served over 100 girls in 2016. To date this year, she's already served 98, so you know she's going to surpass those numbers. The youngest child she has served has been 11 years old, and the average age is 16 years of age. So what she says is restored is basically recovery, relief, and restoration. And, and it's true, and that's what she does. She does a lot of training. She and I do training together. We travel the state, but she also does a lot of training on her own. So she is certified to teach law enforcement, so she does a lot of law enforcement training. She's also helped me in training juvenile probation, juvenile judges. We, as I said, travel the state, and we teach to large groups, kind of like this, where we'll go to a county and we'll pull in, CASA, law enforcement, juvenile judge, juvenile probation, anybody to do with the juvenile system, and we'll do about a 2.5-hour, 3-hour training with them. And so we've done that from northern Indiana to southern Indiana, and so she's just a great resource to have. I also started in Delaware County a CSEC committee, CSEC being commercial sexual exploitation of children, another term for trafficking. I tell you that I switched that to CSEC from trafficking because when you say trafficking, most people think of the movie Taken, and that's really not what we're talking about. So I find with CSEC, they can kind of wrap their brain around it a little bit easier. So I started this committee in Delaware County really right after I came back from that JDAI conference. And it's just a cross-section, anybody involved with kids. And we meet monthly, and we have ever since that started back in late 2014. And we really kind of concentrate first on finding conferences for people to go to get more training and bring that training back to Indiana. And then we also concentrate on training and training within the state. And so Tracy's a part of that committee, and she works with me on that. One of the last things I'll tell you that we've done in Indiana, and we've done quite a few things, and I'm thankful to the Indiana Supreme Court for being very supportive, and that's why we now have a subcommittee with the Commission on Children. But we've worked on screening tools in Indiana. So this year we are piloting screening tools for probation, juvenile probation, and then quick indicator tools for law enforcement and the healthcare field. Because when I told you that 80% of these kids have been involved with DCS, 90% of them saw a healthcare professional while they were being trafficked. And so we want to help the healthcare field help us look for these kids. And so they see a lot of those, health indicators that may not have raised a red flag with them before, but hopefully will now. So we have quick indicator cards that healthcare and law enforcement are using. We have a screening tool we worked with DCS on for juvenile probation. Those are all being piloted now in 5 counties in Indiana, and we hope by May to summer of next year that we'll be able to roll those out to the entire state. And so we'll have all of law enforcement, all the healthcare, and all of probation using those tools. So if you think that someone is a victim of trafficking, emergencies, call 911, but you also always have to call the Department of Child Services hotline, and there's the number. And then there's the National Human Trafficking Resource Center hotline. You can always send a text to be free, and that's the 233-733. If it's not an emergency, you can also contact the Attorney General's office, and they have the tip line there, and they also have a group that meets through the AG's office. So I think we're holding questions to the end, right? Okay, so there you go. Thank you. I brought business cards for Restored if anybody wants that again.
Thank you, Judge Dowling. What Judge Dowling was talking about too, those indicator cards, they're very small. They're given to our nurses at the hospital and to the law enforcement. They come with little checklists so that they can just kind of keep it in their pocket and whip it out if they need to. So another thing off of Judge Dowling's PowerPoint was all the highways. And so one of the things to combat all the human trafficking too is one of the partners that we work alongside with and that help a lot in this is the FBI and the federal government. And so I'm proud to introduce Gregory Massa, who was appointed a special agent with the FBI in 1997. Mr. Massa's first assignment was to the New York field office, where he investigated Italian organized crime matters. And in June of 2015, Mr. Massa was promoted to Assistant Special Agent in Charge with leadership of the Indianapolis Division Criminal Branch. So, Gregory Massa, and also with him tonight.
I'll introduce Mike.
Okay, perfect. He's going to introduce Mike. There we go.
Good evening. Thanks, Prosecutor Curry, Judge. Thanks for having us. It's a very appropriate night for all of us to come together. I mean, just look at the topic is realities of human trafficking. It is a Monday. It's a rainy Monday, and the Colts just got obliterated yesterday. So it's kind of it puts us in a very sobering mood to talk about a very, very important topic. I did not bring a PowerPoint, so you're going to have to focus on me, although I brought some very updated notes and figures. That's part of the reason why I didn't put it on a PowerPoint. I had our intelligence team run some kind of updated statistics for us just so we can share and be part of the conversation. I'm going to speak for about 15 minutes, and then I'm going to turn it over to the supervisor of our Crimes Against Children Task Force, Mike Langman, who's then going to walk through some of the operational items. First of all, it's very humbling for me to be a part of the group here today. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. One of the most frustrating things I hear when I'm speaking in public groups or even amongst law enforcement circles is that what are you guys doing? You're doing human trafficking? I mean, the FBI has a lot of priorities. We have terrorism, trying to protect this country from terrorists. We have other countries trying to spy on us. We have cybersecurity matters. We have bank robbers. We go after corrupt politicians. We have complex financial crimes. What are you doing here? This problem doesn't happen in Indiana, right? It only happens, or if it happens, it only happens on Indy 500 weekend or on a Super Bowl weekend. And I'm here to tell you, this is a 365-day-a-year problem. This happens in Indiana. So the fact that you are all here tonight to learn about this problem, I commend you for that, and that's the first step forward. I'm also very proud to lead very dedicated men and women who work for the FBI every day, day in and day out. And really, when any crime happens, whether it's a crime against children, which is the topic we're about to talk about today, or any crime, what's one of the common threads of all these crimes is there's a victim. So, whenever anyone is victimized, that goes to the root of why we have, why we take an oath and why we protect the Constitution and why we go after these criminals. But when that victim is a juvenile, it really tugs at your heartstrings, and it doubly makes it, makes it more important on why we're doing what we're doing. I will say this problem is way too complex and way too big for any one agency to tackle this alone from a law enforcement perspective. So while I'm up here talking about the operations and the law enforcement side, the FBI is just one player of this. We work, and Supervisory Special Agent Langman will get into that, the different federal, state, and local agencies that we work with every day, day in and day out. Over the last couple of years, our emphasis on human trafficking has grown, as has our partnerships. We've brought in really specialists who are intelligence analysts who really help us look for trends and tactics and techniques that the bad guys are using. And then, we want to stay fresh too. We've also brought in victim witness specialists. These are FBI employees who really help to bridge, because we're on the law enforcement side. I mean, when the FBI knocks on your door, 9 times out of 10, it's not a good day. It's usually there's a subpoena there or a warrant, or it's usually there, to affect justice. And that's where this victim witness comes in. This specialist will help bridge that gap between us and these services that we just talked about. And that's a really, really important piece that I'm jazzed to see about. So I'm going to share with you a couple of metrics and stats. Let's talk first about our domain, and the judge set the table there about that hotspot map. I will say that we followed up that hotspot map in the spring of 2016. We did a domain outreach to all 92 counties. So we sent an agent and an analyst to meet with at least 2 people in every county. Try to get the highest ranking law enforcement official or some public official within each of the 92 counties. And so that took a lot of time and effort and energy, and we had a list of questions and priorities, and hey, what's in your backyard, so that we can look at, hey, what's happening in Lake County may not be happening in Marion County or may not be happening up in Fort Wayne. And what we found is out of the 92 counties in the spring of 2016, 20 reported that crimes against children were a priority concern for them. So that was pretty good. I mean, at least we didn't get that answer that it never happens here. So 20 counties, and probably where you think is exactly where that, and then when we did further analysis, Lake County, South Bend, Elkhart, Fort Wayne, Muncie, Louisville, Indy, Lafayette. Those, and then Evansville as well. So pretty much you know, you can pretty much figure that out, and you would have saved us a lot of time and effort and energies. But anyway, we figured that out as well. I will say this. One theme that pulled out from us from that was, and the judge hit on that we're known as the crossroads of America. In human trafficker circle, we're known as the Midwest Pimp Circuit. Indianapolis is one of 8 cities that's highlighted along this circuit. St. Louis, Las Vegas, Minneapolis, Houston, San Antonio, Kansas City, Indianapolis, a pipeline where trafficking occurs. When we talk about our investigations, I started to say that you know, this has become a priority for us over the last several years, and when I looked at some of our numbers, it just goes to reflect that. Just our sheer number of investigations that we look at. Now these are both, this isn't just sex trafficking of minors, this is also the other element that the judge talked about, which is the labor trafficking as well. But when those numbers are combined, in October of 2015, we had 13 investigations. October of 2016, we had 15, and October of 2017, we had 21 new investigations. So as you can see, each year, we're opening and initiating and adding more and more investigations. And probably one of the singular most important statistical accomplishments that we can do as an agency serving you. It's not all about putting bad guys in jail and getting long sentences, and that is the basis of what we do. But there's one statistical accomplishment in particular that I really hang my hat on at the end of the day and say, you know, this is making a difference, and it's called the child locate stats. So in order for an agent to claim this statistical accomplishment, they have to, through the course of their investigation, identify a juvenile who is being sex trafficked, and then that victim, working with our specialist, get them help and get them out of harm's way. So that's called a child locate stat. So in 2015, we had a goal of 6. We said if we can just rescue 6 juveniles who are being sex trafficked, that's going to be a banner year for us. That year we had 30. Last year, 2016, we said, all right, we had a good year. Let's try to do 10 this year. We're initiating new operations under Supervisor Langeman's leadership. Let's get a goal of 10. Last year we had 31. And then this year, which our fiscal year ends in September, so fiscal year, we're already in fiscal year 18, we're ahead of everyone else. Fiscal year 17 ended and we had a goal of 25, so we more than doubled our goal. We had 36 child recoveries, juvenile recoveries. So that's just from the FBI standpoint, and that's just what we're doing. So in the last 3 years alone, we've had 97 instances of juveniles who were being sex trafficked that we got help and got them on hopefully the right path. Now, you don't become an FBI agent to drive a fancy car or live in a big house. That's just not the reality of it. The reason I became an FBI agent was to make an impact and make a difference. And I can say, without a doubt, that the men and women, the tireless work that they do, that's 97 times that they made a difference. And so to me, that's the most important statistical accomplishment I can share with you. We've had, let me talk a couple of just 2 quick cases, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mike. So normally, we do not have minors that are like really minors. I think this last week it caught national news because one of our offices out in Denver had done an operation where they recovered a 5-year-old and I think like a 5-month-old, a very infant, children who were being trafficked. Our average ages here is 14, 15 is usually the average age. And normally it's exactly how the judge said. It's through a series of bad decisions they may put themselves in these positions. We have, however, over the last 3 years have had 2 incidents where juveniles were kidnapped and then trafficked. One of those I'll share with you. In August of 2015, a 16-year-old female was at a bus stop on the east side, got hitchhiked a ride instead with a 24-year-old male. She was taken to a hotel on the east side, raped, brought to Cincinnati. She was photographed. Her ad was placed on Backpage.com, which in our last presentation we talked about. She was then brought down to Nashville and was forced to have sex with over 10 men that weekend. On her way back up, that's when the FBI, under Mike's leadership, along with our state and local partners, intercepted them coming back into Indiana, and then arrested him and rescued her. So again, that's just the stark reality of what happens. And I think that's why the FBI is uniquely positioned to tackle a problem just like this, because this is a very transient problem. It's not just in one neighborhood or a very hierarchical organization. It's a very flat, very moving, piece. It's like trying to grab, Jell-O with your hands, and it just blobs everywhere. Another case example I'll bring up, which is maybe a little bit more traditional, but maybe with a twist, actually happened up in Lake County. This individual recently pled guilty. And actually, this case started out not as a human trafficking case. It started out as a gang investigation. We have a gang task force up in Lake County, and they were going after the Latin Kings, which is a very violent, organized criminal enterprise. During the course of that investigation, they did stumble upon one individual who we believed was trafficking, humans for sex, and then more problematically, juveniles. So we did a splinter case off of the gang investigation, and at the end of the day, we were able to not only arrest him, we arrested his female accomplice, who was basically a female who was trafficking, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then we also arrested the 41-year-old male who had specifically called and requested them that he wanted to have sex with 14-year-old girls. So we arrested all three of those individuals. During that, we uncovered 8 victims. We identified 8 victims who were being trafficked from Illinois into Indiana, from Illinois up to Michigan, so it was like that kind of tri-state area, and 3 of them were minors. So again, that's another instance. Now, he has pled guilty, and he's facing 10 years in prison, in federal prison, a minimum of 10 years. He has not been sentenced yet. He's awaiting sentencing. I bring up a point about female sex traffickers. Oftentimes we think of pimps or these sex traffickers as males, and predominantly they are. But our behavioral analysis unit just released a study that I read this morning, and there is an emerging trend. Now we talk about, and we look a lot about sex traffickers and how they're utilizing technology to their advantage, how are they continuing to adapt. They're not always relying on Backpage.com. Are they using new technologies, and can we stay current with that? One of the things, and we had this case, like I said, up in Lake County, was a female sex trafficker, under 30, kind of 50-50 split between Caucasian and African American offenders. They themselves were trafficked, is what our behavioral analysis unit said. Usually they were runaways or homeless or foster care. And so they were being sex trafficked at one point in their life, and then they also came up through the ranks. They've been recruiters. They've been the money handlers. They've been the trainers. And so now they're the ones running the show. So that's just a newer problem that we're yet to face. So I think I've pretty much shared, I think, some of the overarching topics I wanted to get to with you. Let's check my notes and see if I missed anything in particular. I'm sure will come up as we talk further, but really it's my privilege and honor to introduce Mike Langeman. Mike is a supervisor for the FBI, and he leads our Crimes Against Children Task Force day in and day out. And this is thankless work, it's hard work. These agents, together with their law enforcement partners, are really coming face to face with the dark underbelly of society. This is ugly stuff. This is not fun. And really the only thing standing between our most precious commodity, which is our children. Many of us in here are parents, right? I have a 15-year-old daughter at home, and it just sickens me to think of what's going on tonight in the state of Indiana. But the reality of it is Mike and his team are out there every day, every night, working this problem. And if not for them, that would just be one less team that's in it for the fight. So without any further ado, Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good evening. On the federal side of things, for the longest time, the FBI did not want to federalize prostitution for a number of reasons. But in 2003, we kind of had the epiphany of we stepped back and looked, and as law enforcement, what we do is we're kind of like golden retrievers. We chase things. Someone goes missing, we go after them. A bad guy runs, we chase him. A runaway runs away, we get them and we bring them back. Well, we started to realize that all these runaways, we're chasing the same runaways and bringing them back to the same place. And so obviously there's an issue where they're running away from. That grew into a much larger scale of the scope of what we looked into. And in 2003, on the national side, we started an initiative called the Innocence Lost National Initiative. What that did was we established in most of our field offices across the country, we have 56 field offices, we established Crimes Against Children task forces. to address juvenile prostitution. What we found are most of these runaways wind up in prostitution eventually. They're running away from something, and when you think about it, a 14, 15, 16-year-old girl on the street, she can't rent a hotel room on her own. She can't get a job. So she is the most vulnerable of all the victims we have out there. And these predators out there, the pimps, know that. They're social masterminds, if you will. They may not be the brightest individuals, but they can manipulate like you would not believe. And they can identify, as the judge said on that Maslow's hierarchy, they can identify what that need is. So the judge talked about the movie Taken. How many have seen that movie? If you haven't, it's a great movie. Liam Neeson's awesome in it. But the reality is that's not what we're looking at. I've only been doing it for 15 years, so I have not seen everything, and I have yet to see that. That sort of underground network of kidnapping and trading isn't really the Eastern Bloc bad guys that we've seen. If you want to see the victims that we're looking at, when you walk through the mall, look at those girls. Like ASAC Massa said, when you drive by a bus stop, you see girls out there. Those are the victims that we're looking at. And it affects every town we have in Indiana. Whether they know it or not, it affects every town. Either they're coming from there or it's happening in their town. So when you hear us talk about it, a lot of times the FBI doesn't use the term human trafficking when we talk about the juveniles. We did that for a reason. Again, going back prior to 2003, human trafficking is what we consider the forced labor, indentured servitude, that sort of thing. When you think about these illegal immigrants that are coming, held in a room in a basement somewhere, and their travel documents are held and they're forced to work at some restaurant or something, that's what we looked at as human trafficking. These people that are smuggled across the border and all of their travel documents are held until they pay it off, that's human trafficking. What we looked at this as was, as the judge pointed out, commercial sexual exploitation of children, or what has later become sex trafficking. And it wasn't until First Lady Michelle Obama, when they first took office, she championed human trafficking. And she really put it out there, and it was great, brought a lot of awareness, and then all of a sudden we realized we couldn't identify as much as everyone thought was out there, and so the prostitution angle started to creep into what is commonly known as human trafficking, which in reality it is, but the Department of Justice, we still look at it as kind of two separate things. They're investigated under two different branches, and there's a good reason. Someone who brings people across from Mexico and holds them as cattle, if you will, is a very, very different mindset than someone that will abduct a girl off the street or manipulate her and then put her out. Very different mindset. So we have to have different investigators go after that from different angles. So what we have done is, as we said, we're part of Innocence Lost National Initiative. So we have a task force set up here in Indianapolis, and we serve all of central Indiana. We have another one that we just established up in Fort Wayne that does all of northern Indiana. And what we do is we have partners in our local law enforcement. We have state police. We have everyone from Howard County Prosecutor's Office. We have Fishers Police, Carmel Police. IMPD is a huge participant with us. And we go out and we put together an investigative model. We figured out what the best practices were and how to go after these people. And we've done what we also call a roadshow now. We've taken the best practices that we've found, and we go out to local departments and try to train them on best practices. A matter of fact, a few years ago, we went up to Delaware County, and we trained the county guys, and they went nuts. They hit it very hard up there. They're a great group of guys up there. And what we try to do is show them that first and foremost, what we're looking at is recovery. We want to recover the victim first and foremost. Even if there's not a case there, it doesn't matter. That's our primary goal. But very close second to that is prosecuting those that put them out there. So one of the big things that we did was a lot of the local departments would go out, and when they would do their stings, they would go after the prostitutes or the johns. One of the things that they were overlooking is who dropped off that girl. Because the girl didn't walk there, she didn't ride her bike there, somebody dropped her off there. Most likely it's the person that's controlling her. So we just set up teams out in the parking lot to identify those people as well. It doubled manpower, but it also almost guaranteed us getting the people that are responsible for putting those girls out there. You guys might have heard recently in the news, Operation Cross Country was a big national initiative. What Cross Country is it is a formal night, actually it's 3 nights, that are picked, and on a national level, all of our task forces get together and do operations during those 3 nights. It's targeted across the country. Cross country is. But that made a lot of national attention this week. However, we do these all the time. You also will sometimes hear about during the Super Bowl, during the Indianapolis 500, all these big special events. And the reason they target special events is because wherever you have disposable income, a lot of disposable income, a lot of times you're going to have prostitution. And as the judge said, if you look at the back page at any given day, under that certain section, the ads roll on and on and on. And it's the bigger the city, the more ads you're going to have. We used to have Craigslist as a repository, and actually a little known fact is that Craig of Craigslist was very, very law enforcement friendly. We used to write programs for law enforcement to help us deobfuscate the numbers, to help us out. But he never went public with it. He took a lot of heat, and he was basically, to get rid of that heat, they just shut down that section. That hurt us for a while because, quite honestly, it's a pretty good repository for us. That was a one-stop shop. And once they went down, a bunch of others popped up. Right now, the big leader is Backpage, but there's at least a dozen others I can tell you right now off the top of my head that cater just for that. It is a moving target. As you've always heard, prostitution is the oldest profession in the world. So the Bible goes back way, it's been around forever. So trying to combat it, we always have to come up with new and innovative techniques, new and innovative tools. And one of the biggest things that we have, though, is the public. When people see it, we need to hear about that. A lot of the hotels that we go into are actually very friendly with us because they don't want it there either. Because the reality is, too, is I know in Indianapolis, they have to get their license renewed every year. One of the things they do is they check how many runs are at that hotel. So it almost hurts the hotel to help us. So we try to help them out too, and not do the arrest there, take it off site, something else. Because the reality is, they're business people, and that's bad for business. They may rent a room there, but the families coming there don't want to see that. A family sees that at a Holiday Inn, they're not going back to a Holiday Inn. And they're going to get killed on TripAdvisor or whatever else they're posting on. So they do not want that. So they are, most of the hotels here are very friendly with us. As Sex Massa said, we have a group of individuals that are very dedicated. It is a every day of the week, every day of the year type of job. We get tips in from places that the judge mentioned, Polaris. They have a human trafficking tip line. We get it in from the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children. We get it from our other field offices. And again, that's one of the advantages we have is that we have offices in every state. So these guys might cross state lines, but so do we. And that's the advantage we have. So we partner up with the locals that know the area, that know what they're doing, and then we help bring that outreach. We used to bring the bigger hammer on the prosecutions. The state has done a pretty good job of matching a lot of the sentencing. So we still work with that. We have some additional charges that we can put on federally. Some of them are a little bit easier to hit. Some of the statutes just say that has to be in or affecting interstate commerce, which quite frankly is anything. So we do have that advantage. But our biggest tool that we have to combat all of this is our task force partnership. And
So just to summarize, before, well, obviously, along with the judge, just take a couple questions, is, when you step back and look at this, are we making a difference? And to me, we are, because we're in the fight, and now you're in the fight too, I mean, whether you want to be or not. I mean, we rely on the public's help for so many things. We can put up billboards till we're blue in the face and ask for the public's help, but if you see something that just doesn't sit right, by all means make that tip. Whether the FBI or not, we're going to be out there to look at it or to pass it and work at it with our partners. I will say this, this problem is not going away. It's, if anything, I think it's worsening. I haven't, at least, since I've been here and working this, it's, so that gets frustrating is while we're doing all this work, we're devoting all these resources, we're making this, we're making this impact. Look, we rescued 97, juveniles over the last 3 years, but that's just a drop in the bucket. How many others are out there that we don't know about? And so that's what keeps you up at night. Are we doing everything we possibly can? But I wanted to thank everyone for their attendance and for coming. And I know the judge really wanted to answer a lot of questions, so I'll bring her back up here. But thanks for your time and your attendance.
If you have any questions, you can go ahead and we'll.
Yeah, so like these things, we talked about the 3-night situation, the cross-country thing. So do you set it up like we were talking about, how to catch a predator kind of thing, where you like lure these guys there with, how does it work?
Yeah, it's actually-
TV.
No cameras, but,
What's his name?
no Chris Hansen.
Yeah.
The question was,
Oh, I'm sorry.
how do they set these things up for the operation cross-country? How are these things set up?
Compared to television, how
Yeah.
they perceive it.
She was wondering how our setup for Operation Cross Country compares with like Chris Hansen on To Catch a Predator. Actually, to set up those 3 nights, it takes quite a bit of preparation ahead of time. So actually starting a month or 2 ahead of time, we're coordinating with all of our partners, getting everything set up. One of the things that the judge touched on too was the victim services side of it. Restore, we work with Restore, we work with Catholic Charities, we work with the Salvation Army. We work with probably 10 to 12 different agencies on any given night. We also have instituted the health service. Health Human Services will come in and do testing too for the girls that we come across. That's part of the deal, that they talk and they get tested and we make sure everyone's clean and safe. And at the end of it too is, law enforcement, we gotta have one gear, and it's nice to be able to turn them over to victim services, and then they're the ones that can get them any services they need. But we do set up the sting operations.
The hotel you were talking about, like the 3 days.
Right, so that hotel part, we'll take up a pretty good block. We'll have 4 to 5 rooms in a hotel. And we set it up because we are calling them and bringing them to the hotel. And then, again, like I said, when the girl comes to the room, we also have teams outside that are waiting for whoever drops them off. So we have a lot of moving pieces going at one time.
You just come straight out and ask them, like, if you have a 15-year-old girl, you know what I mean? Or if you're trying to lure these people that are having kids, right?
Right.
So you want to make it seem from peers that you want, looking for a young girl like that.
Right.
So I'm just curious as opposed to the way they perceive it on television.
Yeah, no cameras, no Chris Hansen. Our Chris Hansen has a badge and cuffs, so it's a little.
Okay, I know I heard somebody over here, back there.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. I have one for Judge Dowling and one for Agent Greg Massa. Thank you for coming over from Muncie. I'm a Richmond person, and it's good to see you running around the state and all that.
Sure.
Your statistics at the very beginning were very compelling, but I didn't catch the source. Was it the Polaris?
Most of those come from Shared Hope International.
Shared
So,
Hope International.
You can go to their
Your
website.
level of confidence is high in those statistics. 1 in 3 is kind of alarming.
It is
And
alarming,
so it
but
should lead to action.
yeah, so the 1 in 3, we get to that 300,000 number, but those are based on studies where they looked at the number of kids who are charged with prostitution each year. So we now have several states that are the safe harbor states, so we know those kids can't be charged with prostitution. And I can tell you that we have a lot of kids coming in for other reasons, so that 300,000 number for the nation is low.
Okay. That leads to the question I had for Agent Massa. At the beginning, you mentioned a number of priorities that you have to juggle, and of course, there's a lot. They're all legitimate. One way that a civilian like myself can understand the management resources you're putting towards these objectives is to, if you could, just give us the percentiles of where your money goes, or how much per rescue, or what metric do you use in a data-driven world to manage the trafficking issue as well as all the other things you have to do?
Well, you sound like a concerned taxpayer, so you want to know what your money is, what your money didn't. And I will say, I do have beard envy. That is a phenomenal beard. I went to Afghanistan in 2011, and I came back with one quite like that. But I've trimmed it since then. Anyway, I digress. So, yeah, I will say this. I supervise our all criminal branch agents in the FBI here in Indianapolis. We also have our national security priorities. So that's another ASAC. So there's a duplicate of me running all of our national security investigations. So that's our funded staffing level. So Congress sets our funded staffing level. We have 133 agents across this division. So we cover the entire that's spread across all of those violations that I talked about to cover 92 counties. So it's really not a lot. People think the FBI's got unlimited resources, which we don't. What we do have though is on major criminal investigations or incidents of terrorism, or when you have a major special event, we can call in to other FBI offices like Chicago, like Detroit, like Quantico, and we can get reinforcements. So that's one asset it comes in. To get more to your point, I can't put a price tag on the child locates, and I'm not going to. I'll put it to you this way: Operation Cross Country, the 11th iteration that we just ran, which was last week, that Supervisory Special Agent Langeman spearheaded. We did that in 3 locations around the state. We did it 3 nights. We started weeks ago with planning. How do we plan this? We have to pay overtime for analysts to sit with us. We pay overtime for our task force officers to come on with us. We have to pay the agents their salary. We have to rent, the different hotel rooms and the different accoutrements that we're doing. And at the end of the day, we didn't have any juvenile recoveries this past iteration. So that's a disappointment to me. Now we did arrest 2 traffickers, so we got 2 traffickers off the street. But in a way, now those 2 traffickers are going to face, federal charges, and they're going to go away to prison, and that's great. That's a success. But we didn't have any child locate stat on this past iteration. So I don't know if I'm answering your question. I'm not going to put a price tag on it because to me you can't. It's a human life, and it's worth fighting. It's priceless. Yeah.
Right here in the front row. Ma'am?
What do you do with the tips given by potential victims?
When we interview a victim and she gives us information,
Yeah.
we start another case. We take and run that down fully.
Or we'll refer it. If it's to another field, if it's not here to Central to Indiana, we'll write it up and we'll share with our Detroit office. If it's something that may be more appropriate for the locals to take a lead on, we can pass it off to them.
Okay, what happens when offenses happen on non-commercial property?
For
Non-commercial property,
like a house,
yes.
the charge is still the same.
Still the same,
Mhm.
still the same process of investigation.
Did they use Backpage.com? Did they use a telephone? Then it's interstate, so that's how the federal government.
Right. It's not the venue itself that doesn't make it federal for us. It's how it's done is what makes it an offense for us.
Okay, can you check the back page
Mm-hmm.
website?
Yes.
Okay, and also I wanted to know, do you still have safe houses for victims?
Yes. That's again where the victim services come in. They have many places set up, restored. Tracy gets she has contacts all over the state of safe places to put them. Again, we work with probably 12 different agencies that can place them in safe places.
Ma'am, over here?
You talked about prostitution and not having the kids be accused of that. So my understanding is the adults still are accused of prostitution even though they've been sex trafficked. So, I mean, isn't that a catch-22? I mean, who would want to come forward if they're going to get prosecuted for prostitution?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really difficult situation. I mean, a lot of women who are now accused or charged with prostitution were probably trafficked as a juvenile. The part of the difficulty of this is a lot of them refuse services. I mean, if they're a juvenile, we can get them into the juvenile system and place them where we can provide them services. But when they're adults, they have a choice. And, that's one of the things Tracy does when she works with the FBI and they're running the sting operations, is she's there to talk to them and tried to talk them into getting services, but most of the time they refuse.
But wouldn't you refuse if you're gonna be convicted of prostitution?
Well, I can't say that they're necessarily going to be charged with prostitution, but at that point, I mean, if law enforcement's there and if there is a pimp and they are trafficking them, there is an opportunity that law enforcement and prosecutors have of trying to go after the trafficker and providing her with services. I know, and I don't know a lot about it, and Prosecutor Curry may be able to say more about this, but Indianapolis and Marion County Prosecutor's Office had a program, and may still have, where they offered those women kind of a diversion where if they go to a class for about 6 weeks, then their charges are dismissed. So there are services and programs out there available to them, but even when those are offered, they're usually refused.
So from our perspective, the law enforcement side, a juvenile doesn't have a choice. I mean, they can't even get their own cell phone contract until they're 18, so they can't make a choice to be out there or not. But with an adult, from the law enforcement side, it's tough to be able to treat them like a victim unless they give us something that we can latch on to say that they're a victim. Because we also see that not every one of these is involuntary. There are some on a higher end that do it because the money is very good. So unless they give us something that we can hang our hat on to say you're a victim, it's tough to be able to treat them as a victim and not go forward with that. And sometimes, to be honest with you, that sometimes is the wake-up call for them to say, this is it for me.
Okay, thank you.
We can take 2 more questions, and then we've got a lot to do, and we'll need to wrap up.
Back there.
You hit on the fact that a lot of their children, you have them from the ages of, I believe it was 12 to 14 as girls, 11 to 13 as boys. Restored is taking care of the young girls. Who is helping the young boys?
Restored will as well, and there are agencies out there. It's difficult for us to, it's even more difficult for us to recover the boys than it is for us to recover the girls. And I can't really answer why to that. I think that what we have found is that trans youth are part of this population, and that they tend, and the boys and trans youth tend to advertise themselves or exploit themselves. They don't always have a third-party exploiter. So there's so many different levels to this, and the agents kind of referred to this and talked about it like the Jell-O. It was a perfect example of that kind of falling between your fingers. You know, I sit at my desk daily and just shake my head and just go, ooh, there's so many different components to this, so many different levels to it, so many different ways that it happens. The population is extremely difficult. So trying to get a handle on this, I mean, we're behind the 8 ball on this. This is, even though we've been working on this for a long time, we're still behind the 8 ball. So there's just so many different components that it's just difficult to you know, explain all of that. But Restored does, they've interviewed some of the male victims. There have just been a few that have been identified.
So in the people that are buying, do you have a socioeconomic status for the people that are participating on the purchasing end?
Runs the gamut. It's all across.
Colorblind and socioeconomic, it's all.
Yeah, across, unless you guys want to add it.
I tell you that we rarely come across males that are doing this. When we do, we have found most of the time that they're not being trafficked, it's more of a survival sex for them. That's how they get money to survive, and they're doing it themselves. Because of that, their placement is different as well. The services they get, it's a little bit different. They need more of a social support type service than removing a girl from being trafficked.
But as far as the person who's making the purchase, that you're trying to catch at the hotel room with the trafficked victim, you've got your John, you've got your victim, you've got this person over here buying. Is that mostly male, female, white, Asian? I mean, what is the buyer? What do they look like?
Predominantly male.
And then predominantly male, so, and then, I mean, are they predominantly rich, are they predominantly poor? Doesn't matter.
Yeah, Did you want to take one more?
One more.
One more. Right here.
This question is for you.
Okay.
The phone numbers that we were given,
Mhm.
you said first dial 911, but with the Department of Children's Services, what are we telling them? What
Make-
we've observed?
Sure,
or-
yeah, and you're telling them that you believe that there's a victim of human trafficking. Use those terms.
Okay.
Because that kicks in a few things. Number one, they're keeping numbers for us. So in order for us to be able to track numbers, we need that. Number two is it tells them what tool they need to use and that they need to come in and do an assessment. And then they're going to ask you a lot more questions. Why do you think this is human trafficking? And you're going to list off the red flags that you saw. Okay?
Obviously, this was a timely subject, in light of the headlines the last couple of weeks, but if you read the Indianapolis News, you would think that we all just discovered human trafficking. And if I could just take a minute to talk about our own office as well. We actually obtained our first conviction in a jury trial of a human trafficker when we convicted an individual named Chris Smiley in January of 2011. Many of the changes that the judge referred to in legislation came about because our office advocated with the legislature to make changes to give us more tools to deal with this serious plague that we're dealing with. And in 2012, the statute was amended to specifically give us greater tools against those who traffic in minors. And that actually was passed in the first of the session in 2012 and had an emergency immediate effective date. And by March of that year, we had charged James Martin with trafficking of a minor with the new statute. So our office has been at the forefront of this subject and will continue to do so. Stephanie is our current deputy prosecutor who works, including being our representative on the task force that's a combination of our federal partners and the local police agencies. One last thing, if you indulge me one last time, before we get to the obligatory photo, that will take us approximately 90 minutes to get everyone organized here for the group photo, and then we will do the presentations as well. But I'm speaking in a couple of weeks. I've been asked some time ago to speak to a church group that's having an entire weekend retreat, and to talk about what it is that is driving a lot of the violent crime that we're seeing, and what it is that they can do, what we can all do to address it. As I've had some of the interns helping me pull together information and put together materials, I thought about those issues as it relates to the subject of the first 2 weeks. And what are the life forces that make the difference between the life trajectory of Thomas Keyes and Marvin Finney, who were on the right course in their lives, and then the life forces that led to Carlton Hart and the 5 defendants who committed that horrible crime. And so my parting unsolicited request is that we all not give up, and that we all should be engaged in any number of activities to hopefully get our young people on a better path. And whether that's working in an after-school arts program or summer employment programs or merely supporting financially those organizations that are out there doing that work, I would encourage all of us to continue to do that.